They say living well is the best revenge. But sometimes destroying the person who broke you is the only way to heal. Richard Sterling thought his wife Sarah was just a quiet, penniless orphan he could discard once he climbed the corporate ladder. He stole her ideas, drained her bank account, and left her on the street for a younger mistress. He thought he had taken everything. But there was one thing: Richard didn't check Sarah's birth certificate. He didn't know that the homeless wife he just evicted was the only sister of the man about to buy Richard's entire company. And payday. It's coming today. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper echoed like a gunshot in the sterile silence of the conference room. It was done. Richard Sterling capped his Mont Blanc pen, a gift Sarah had saved for 6 months to buy him 5 years ago, and slid the divorce papers across the mahogany table. He didn't look at her. He looked at his watch, a platinum Rolex Daytona, checking the time as if he were late for a lunch reservation rather than ending a 10-year marriage. "It's generous, Sarah," Richard said, his voice smooth, practiced. The voice of a man who had spent the last decade charming investors and backstabbing partners. "You get the Honda. You get your personal effects. I take the portfolio, the house in the Hamptons, and the intellectual property rights to Project Aegis." Sarah sat frozen. The leather chair felt cold against her back. She looked small in the oversized boardroom of Sterling Dynamics, the company she had built from the ground up alongside him. Project Aegis wasn't just IP, it was her code. It was the algorithm she wrote late at night while Richard was out networking, which she now knew meant sleeping with Jessica, his 24-year-old PR director. "Richard," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling, not with sadness, but with a shock so profound it felt like paralysis. "That algorithm is mine. The house, my grandmother's inheritance, paid the down payment. You can't just—" "I can," Richard interrupted, finally looking at her. His eyes were ice blue, devoid of the warmth she once thought she saw there. He signaled to his lawyer a shark named Mr. Davies from the firm Pearson and Spector. "The prenup you signed was thorough. And regarding the IP, you developed it while employed by Sterling Dynamics. As CEO, I own it. As for the house, the deed is in the trust. My trust." He stood up, buttoning his bespoke suit jacket. "Face it, Sarah. You're a liability. You don't fit the image I need for the IPO. Investors want youth vitality. They want a power couple. Not whatever this is." He gestured vaguely at her simple cardigan and jeans. "I built you," she said, her voice rising. "When we met, you were waiting tables at a TGI Fridays. I taught you how to code. I wrote your business school application essays. I stayed in the shadows so you could shine." Richard laughed. It was a dry, cruel sound. "And that's where you belong, Sarah. In the shadows. Security will escort you out. You have an hour to clear your desk. Don't make a scene. It's embarrassing." He walked out without looking back. Sarah didn't cry. Not yet. She walked to the window of the 40th floor, looking out over the grey expanse of Manhattan. The rain was lashing against the glass. She had $400 in her checking account. She had no job, having technically been a consultant for Richard, with no salary for the last 3 years to save the company money. She was 32 years old, and she had been erased. As she packed her cardboard box, a photo of her parents who died when she was 4, a dried rose from their first date, a stress ball Jessica walked by. The young woman leaned against the doorframe, sipping a green juice. "Make sure you leave the company laptop." Jessica smirked. "Richard needs it for the presentation in London next week. We're flying first class on Emirates. I hear the champagne is to die for." Sarah looked at her. He'll do it to you too, Jessica, once you serve your purpose. Unlikely. Jessica laughed. I'm not a doormat. Bye, Sarah. 2 weeks later, Sarah was living in a motel in Queens that smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon pledge. The generous settlement Richard had promised was tied up in administrative processing, which her free legal aid advisor told her was code for "he's going to bleed you dry in court fees before you see a dime." She applied for jobs, but Richard had blacklisted her. Every tech firm in the city knew Sterling Dynamics. Richard had painted her as unstable, a jealous ex-wife who had tried to sabotage the company. She was radioactive. It was a Tuesday night, raining again, when she saw it. She was sitting in a diner nursing a lukewarm coffee, watching the TV mounted in the corner. It was a segment on Bloomberg Technology. The anchor was beaming. And finally, the unicorn of the year. Sterling Dynamics is set to go public next month with a valuation of $4 billion. CEO Richard Sterling is being hailed as the visionary of the decade for his groundbreaking Aegis algorithm. The screen cut to Richard. He looked golden-tanned, standing on the deck of a yacht in Monaco. Jessica was draped over his arm, wearing a diamond necklace that cost more than Sarah's entire life earnings. It's all about vision, Richard was saying to the camera. I sat in my garage for years coding this line by line. It's about sacrifice. I had to cut out the dead weight in my life to truly fly. Sarah felt the bile rise in her throat. Dead weight. He was erasing her history. He was stealing her genius. And the world was applauding him for it. She left the diner, walking blindly into the rain. She felt a deep, dark hollow in her chest. She had no family. Her parents had died in a car crash in Ohio when she was a toddler. She had been put into the foster system, bounced around until she aged out. Richard was the first person she had truly trusted. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She had one contact saved that she had never called. It wasn't a friend. It wasn't a lawyer. It was a number she had found 3 years ago, hidden in a box of her late mother's things she had retrieved from a storage unit in Ohio. It was a handwritten letter from her mother, addressed to Alexander. If anything happens to us, find him. He is your brother. He was taken by his father, but he is your blood. Sarah had been too proud to call. She wanted to make it on her own. She wanted to be Sarah Sterling's successful tech mogul. But Sarah Sterling was dead. She dialed the number. It rang once, twice. Blackwood Private Office. A crisp British voice answered. Who is calling? I need to speak to Alexander Blackwood, Sarah stammered. Mr. Blackwood does not take unsolicited calls. Please submit your inquiry to... Tell him it's Sarah, she said, her voice cracking. Tell him I have his mother's eyes, and I have nothing left. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. Hold, please. 30 seconds later, a deep baritone voice came on the line. It sounded like thunder wrapped in velvet. Sarah, is this Alexander? Where are you? The voice was urgent, intense. I'm in Queens, a motel on 21st Street. Stay there. Do not move. I am coming. You're in New York. I am everywhere, Sarah. Give me 20 minutes. The car that pulled up to the dilapidated motel wasn't a taxi. It wasn't an Uber. It was a cavalcade. 3 blacked-out Cadillac Escalades and a Rolls-Royce Phantom. The spinning R on the wheels seemed to mock the cracked pavement of the parking lot. Residents of the motel peeked out through their curtains. Drug dealers on the corner scattered. This was serious money. This was dangerous money. The rear door of the Phantom opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, 6'4", wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that fit him like armor. He had dark hair just beginning to grey at the temples and eyes that were the exact same shade of hazel as Sarah's. Alexander Blackwood, the billionaire owner of Blackwood Holdings, a man who owned shipping lines in Greece, lithium mines in Nevada, and real estate in London that rivaled the royal families. He was known in the business world as the Reaper. He didn't just buy companies, he dismantled them if they displeased him. He ignored the rain, ignored the bodyguards flanking him with umbrellas, and walked straight to Sarah, who was standing under the awning, shivering. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. He studied her face, looking for the ghost of the mother he barely remembered. He saw it. "Sarah," he said softly. "I didn't know if you were real," she whispered. "I looked you up. I saw the magazines. I didn't think you'd want this." She gestured to her wet clothes, her worn-out sneakers. Alexander took off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was warm and smelled of sandalwood and expensive scotch. "You are a Blackwood. We do not leave our own behind." He guided her into the back of the Rolls-Royce. The interior was like a spaceship, cream leather, soft, ambient lighting silence, so profound it hurt her ears. "Drive her to the Pierre Hotel," Alexander commanded. Then he turned to Sarah. He opened a crystal decanter and poured her a glass of water. "Drink, then talk. Tell me everything. Who did this to you?" Sarah held the glass with both hands to stop them from shaking. And then the dam broke. She told him everything. The 10 years, the coding, the nights she slept under her desk to meet deadlines, the way Richard slowly isolated her, the divorce, the mockery, the poverty, the fact that Richard was about to become a billionaire on the back of her work. Alexander listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look at his phone. His face remained impassive, a mask of stone, but his hand resting on his knee tightened until his knuckles turned white. When she finished, she was crying, exhausted. "I just wanted you to know," she sniffled. "I don't need money. I didn't want to be alone anymore." Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief, handing it to her. "You will never be alone again," he said. His voice dropped an octave. "And you will not need money. You have mine." He pressed a button on the intercom. "Edwards." "Yes, sir," the driver replied. "Change of plans. Call the London team. Wake them up. I don't care that it's 300 a.m. there. Get the acquisition team on the line. And find out everything you can about a company called Sterling Dynamics." Sarah looked up alarmed. "What are you going to do?" "You can't sue him. He has the best lawyers. He has Pearson and Spector." Alexander let out a dark, terrifying chuckle. He poured himself a drink. "Lawyers are for people who follow the rules, Sarah. I don't follow rules. I write them." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw the family resemblance. It was a predator's gaze. "Richard Sterling wants to sell his company, does he? He wants to enter the big leagues." Alexander swirled his drink. "Then let's welcome him. I'm looking for a new technology acquisition. I think it's time Sterling Dynamics met Blackwood Holdings." "He doesn't know who you are," Sarah realized. "He doesn't know I'm your sister. I used the name Sora Cross on our marriage certificate because I never legally changed it from my foster name." "Perfect." Alexander smiled. It was a smile that promised violence. "He thinks he's a shark, Sarah. He's about to find out he's just swimming in my tank." The car glided toward the Manhattan skyline. "We are going to buy him," Alexander said. We are going to let him think he has won the lottery. We will build him up so high that when he falls, the impact will shatter him into dust. And you, my dear sister, are going to be the one who pushes him." The next month was a blur of activity that Sarah could barely comprehend. She was moved into the penthouse suite at the Pierre. A team of doctors, nutritionists, and stylists descended upon her. It wasn't just about making her look good. It was about armor. Alexander told her, "If you want to kill a king, you must look like a queen." She cut her hair into a sharp, asymmetrical bob. She traded her cardigans for tailored Givenchy and Alexander McQueen. She learned to walk not with the hurried shuffle of an overworked coda, but with the gliding confidence of a woman who owns the pavement. But the most important work happened in the war room of Blackwood Holdings. Sarah sat at the head of the table, flanked by Alexander and his top analysts. They dissected sterling dynamics. "Here," Sarah said, pointing to a schematic on the screen. "The Aegis algorithm has a flaw. Richard doesn't know it because he didn't write it. I did. If you overload the server capacity by 300% during the integration phase, the security protocols collapse." Alexander nodded, impressed. "A backdoor, a kill switch," Sarah corrected. "I put it in 2 years ago when he started acting distant, just in case. I never thought I'd use it." "Brilliant," Alexander murmured. The plan was set. Blackwood Holdings, through a shell company called Obsidian Ventures, made an offer to Richard Sterling. It was an offer too good to refuse $5 billion for Sterling Dynamics, keeping Richard on as CEO with a massive retention bonus. Richard took the bait immediately. Sarah watched from the shadows of the boardroom, via a hidden camera feed, as Richard signed the preliminary papers with Alexander's proxy, a man named Mr. Graves. "It's a pleasure doing business with Obsidian." Richard smirked, shaking hands. "You'll find our tech is unrivaled." "We are counting on it," Graves said dryly. "The chairman of our parent company will be flying in for the final signing and the gala next Friday. He requires all IP transfer to be completed by then." "Done," Richard said. "I'll have the keys to the kingdom ready." "Good," Graves said. "The chairman is particular. He will be bringing his co-chair. She handles the technical auditing." "She?" Richard asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, she is very eager to meet the genius behind the code." Richard puffed out his chest. "I look forward to charming her." In the surveillance room, Alexander turned to Sarah. "He has no idea." Sarah stared at the screen at the husband who had thrown her away like trash. She felt a cold, hard resolve settle in her gut. "No," she said. "He doesn't." "Are you ready for the gala, Sarah?" Alexander asked. "It will be at the Met. The entire industry will be there. The press, the investors, his mistress." Sarah stood up, smoothing the skirt of her blood-red dress. "I'm ready, brother. Let's go to work." The night of the gala arrived with the kind of electric tension usually reserved for heavyweight title fights or royal weddings. The venue was the Metropolitan Museum of Art, specifically the Temple of Dendur room. Richard Sterling had rented it out to celebrate the impending acquisition of Sterling Dynamics by Obsidian Ventures. He wanted the world to see him ascend to the throne of the tech world. Richard stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the bridal suite of the Plaza Hotel. He liked the irony of getting ready in a room designed for beginnings when he felt he had finally shed his past. He adjusted his bow tie. It was silk hand-stitched in Milan. He checked his phone. Sterling Dynamics stock was up 15% in after-hours trading, just on the rumors of the deal. "Richard, do I look okay?" Jessica stepped out of the bathroom. She was wearing a shimmering silver gown, that clung to every curve designed by Versace. It was stunning, but Richard frowned. "It's a bit loud, isn't it?" he critiqued, picking a piece of lint off his jacket. "We are meeting the chairman of Obsidian tonight. Old money, European money. They value subtlety, Jessica. Try not to embarrass me." Jessica's face fell, her insecurity flashing in her eyes. "I just wanted to look good for the cameras." "Just smile and don't drink too much champagne," Richard commanded, grabbing his phone. "And if they ask about the development timeline of Aegis, you say nothing. You're the PR director, but tonight you're just the arm candy. Let the adults talk." He didn't see the flash of hatred in her eyes as he turned away. He was too busy admiring his own reflection. He was Richard Sterling. He had won. Meanwhile, in the penthouse of the Pierre Hotel, the atmosphere was entirely different. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of a steamer. Sarah stood on a podium while a tailor made final adjustments to the hem of her dress. It was a weapon of a dress. A deep blood-red velvet custom-made by Dior, structured to look regal and intimidating. It had a high neck, but a back that plunged dangerously low. Her hair, now a sharp, dark bob, framed a face that had been contoured to highlight her cheekbones. The soft, broken woman from the motel was gone. In her place was a statue of vengeance. Alexander Blackwood walked in, holding a small velvet box. He was dressed in a tuxedo that cost more than Richard's car cut, with the severe elegance of a man who owned the room before he even entered it. "Everyone is in position," Alexander said, his voice calm. "My legal team is on site. The press has been briefed that a major announcement is coming. The trap is set." He opened the velvet box. Inside lay a necklace of diamonds and rubies. The centerpiece was a ruby the size of a quail's egg, dark as dried blood. "The Blackwood heart," Alexander said, fastening it around her neck. "Our grandmother wore this to meet the Queen in 1952. Now you wear it to dethrone a peasant." Sarah touched the cold stone. She looked in the mirror. She barely recognized herself. "I'm terrified, Alex. What if he sees right through me? What if I crumble?" Alexander spun her around, gripping her shoulders. "He won't see Sarah, the wife he abused. He will see Sarah Blackwood, the co-chair of Obsidian. He is blinded by his own greed. He sees only the checkbook, not the hand holding the pen." He offered her his arm. "Tonight we don't just win. We rewrite history. Are you ready to take back what is yours?" Sarah took a deep breath. She thought of the rain against the motel window. She thought of the years of stolen credit. She thought of Richard's laugh when he fired her. Her eyes hardened. "Let's go burn it down." The arrival at the Met was a frenzy. Flashbulbs popped like strobe lights. Richard and Jessica walked the red carpet, Richard waving like a politician soaking in the adulation. Reporters thrust microphones in his face. "Mr. Sterling, is it true the deal is worth $5 billion? Richard." "What's next for the visionary of the century?" Richard beamed. "The deal is historic," he told a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. "It proves that true innovation cannot be stopped. Sterling Dynamics is the future." Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd at the entrance. The shouting reporters went silent. Heads turned. A convoy of 4 Rolls-Royce Phantoms pulled up to the curb. The sheer display of power was overwhelming. The lead car's door opened, and Alexander Blackwood stepped out. The crowd gasped. Alexander was a ghost. He rarely attended public events. His presence alone signaled that this was a monumental occasion. But it was who he helped out of the car next that stopped the breath in everyone's throat. Sarah stepped onto the red carpet. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She walked with a lethal grace, her red dress a violent splash of color against the grey stone of the museum. She looked like royalty. She looked like war. "Who is that?" the whispers started. "Is that Alexander Blackwood's girlfriend? No, look at the jawline. They look alike." Richard, standing at the top of the stairs, squinted. He saw Alexander Blackwood. He recognized him from business journals. He felt a surge of triumph. The legendary Reaper had come to pay him homage. But the woman... Richard felt a strange itching discomfort in the back of his brain. There was something familiar about her walk, but he dismissed it instantly. Sarah was probably cleaning tables in a diner in Jersey right now. This woman was a goddess. She radiated wealth. Alexander and Sarah ascended the stairs. Richard stepped forward, extending his hand. His smile went and practiced. "Mr. Blackwood," Richard said, his voice booming for the cameras. "An honor, truly. Welcome to the future." Alexander looked at Richard's hand, then up to his face. He didn't shake it. He just smiled, a cold, predatory curving of the lips. "Mr. Sterling," Alexander said smoothly, "I believe you know my co-chair. She has been managing the technical audit of your files." Alexander stepped aside. Sarah stood directly in front of Richard. She was wearing 4-inch Louboutins, making her nearly eye level with him. She looked deep into his eyes, those ice-blue eyes that had once looked at her with such disdain. "Hello, Richard," she said. Her voice was different, trained lower, sharper, but the intonation was unmistakable. Richard froze. His smile faltered, twitching at the corners. He blinked rapidly. He looked at the ruby around her neck, then back at her eyes. "Sarah," he whispered the word, escaping him like a wheeze. "I prefer Ms. Blackwood tonight," she said loud enough for Jessica to hear. Jessica dropped her clutch. It hit the floor with a dull thud. "Ms. Blackwood," Richard stammered, his brain misfiring. "But the motel, Shall we go inside?" Sarah cut him off, her voice dripping with bored condescension. "We have a lot of paperwork to sign, and I'd hate to keep the press waiting. They do love a good story." She brushed past him, her velvet dress trailing over his expensive Italian shoes. Richard stood there, paralyzed, as the photographers went cold, capturing the moment the king of tech looked like he had seen a ghost. The Temple of Endor inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art was not merely a venue. It was a declaration of immortality. The ancient Egyptian sandstone temple, illuminated by soft golden uplighting, stood as a witness to thousands of years of history. Tonight, however, it was a backdrop for Richard Sterling's ego. The air smelled of expensive perfume, Baccarat Rouge 540, and Creed Aventus mingled with the crisp scent of chilled vintage champagne. Waiters from Cipriani moved like ghosts through the crowd, balancing trays of caviar-topped blinis and flute glasses of Dom Perignon 2008. Richard Sterling stood near the reflecting pool holding court. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo, bespoke from Brioni, the silk lapels catching the light. On his wrist sat a Patek Philippe Nautilus, a timepiece that cost more than the house he grew up in. He checked it every 3 minutes, not because he cared about the time, but because he liked seeing the diamonds catch the light. "Richard Darling, the CEO of Sequoia Capital, is looking over here," Jessica whispered, clutching his arm. She was wearing a silver Versace gown that was cut aggressively low, a desperate attempt to outshine the wives of the investors. She looked beautiful, but brittle. Her eyes darted around the room with the anxiety of an imposter. Let him look, Richard murmured, sipping his champagne. In an hour, he won't just be looking. He'll be begging to buy in. Tonight isn't just a merger, Jess. It's a coronation. He surveyed the room. The titans of industry were here. There were board members from Goldman Sachs, tech reporters from Bloomberg and The Verge, and even a few minor celebrities paid to add glamour to the event. They were all here to witness the sale of Sterling Dynamics to Obsidian Ventures for a staggering $5 billion. Mr. Sterling, a reporter from CNBC approached a cameraman in tow. A quick word before the signing. How does it feel to be the sole architect of the Aegis algorithm? Richard adjusted his bow tie, flashing his perfect veneered smile. It's humbling, really. You know, many nights I sat alone in the dark, just me and the code building the digital infrastructure that will protect the Western world. It requires a certain fortitude, a singular vision that few possess. He believed it. That was the terrifying part. Over the last 3 years, Richard had told the lie so many times that he had overwritten his own memory. He had forgotten Sarah's hunching form over the keyboard. He had forgotten the coffee he brought her while she fixed his syntax errors. In his mind, he was the genius. Suddenly, the hum of conversation in the vast hall died down. It started near the entrance, a ripple of silence that spread outward like a wave. Heads turned. Glasses were lowered. Richard frowned. What is it? Is the chairman here? He looked toward the massive glass wall that looked out onto Central Park. The doors opened, and a hush fell over the room that was so profound it felt heavy. Alexander Blackwood entered first. The chairman of Obsidian Ventures looked like a storm cloud trapped in a tuxedo. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated the kind of old money power that didn't need to shout. He walked with a cane, not out of necessity, but as an affectation of authority. But no one was looking at Alexander. They were looking at the woman on his arm. Sarah stepped into the temple of Dendur, like a queen returning from exile to execute traitors. She wore a custom Alexander McQueen gown in a shade of red, so deep it looked like arterial blood. The bodice was structured like armor, the skirt flowing like liquid fire. Her hair, once a frizzy mess tied back with rubber bands, was now a sharp geometric bob that accentuated her razor-sharp cheekbones. Around her neck hung the Blackwood heart, a ruby and diamond necklace that was rumored to have been lost in the 1900s. It glinted under the museum lights, a cold red eye staring at the crowd. "Who is that?" Jessica hissed, her grip on Richard's arm tightening painfully. Richard squinted. His brain refused to process the visual data. He saw the eyes' hazel intelligent piercing. He saw the way she held her chin, a gesture of defiance he had seen 1,000 times across a dinner table. But the context was wrong. This woman was power. This woman was wealth. This woman couldn't be the mouse he had kicked out of his office. "It can't be," Richard whispered, his stomach dropping through the floor. Sarah and Alexander moved through the crowd. The sea of people parted for them. They didn't stop to chat with the bankers. They walked straight toward Richard. As they approached, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah stopped 3 feet from him. She was wearing 4-inch Christian Louboutin heels, putting her eye to eye with him. "Good evening, Richard," she said. The voice was the same, smooth calm but stripped of the warmth it once held. It was the voice of a judge reading a death sentence. "Sarah," Richard choked out. The name sounded absurd in this setting. What are you doing here? How did you get in?" "I was invited," she said, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I believe you're waiting for the co-chair of Obsidian Ventures to countersign the acquisition. Richard blinked rapidly. Yes, but where is she? She is standing in front of you. Alexander Blackwood interjected his voice, a deep baritone rumble. Allow me to introduce my sister, Sarah Blackwood, formerly known as Sarah Cross, and for a brief unfortunate period, Sarah Sterling. The glass of champagne in Richard's hand slipped. It shattered on the stone floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Champagne splashed onto his Italian leather shoes, but he didn't move. Sister! Richard gasped. He looked from Alexander to Sarah. That's a lie. You're an orphan. You have nothing. I had nothing because I chose to build something with you, Sarah said, stepping closer, invading his personal space. I hid my name to make my own way. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for the Blackwood fortune. And you proved to me exactly what that love was worth, didn't you? Jessica stepped forward, trembling. Richard, what is going on? Is this the consultant you fired? Sarah slowly turned her gaze to Jessica. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. The dress is Versace, isn't it? Fall 2023 collection. A bit dated, don't you think? And it pulls terribly at the seams. Jessica gasped, covering her chest with her clutch. We have a schedule to keep, Alexander announced, checking his pocket watch. The presentation begins in 5 minutes. I trust your technical demonstration is ready. Mr. Sterling. Richard was hyperventilating. His world was tilting on its axis. Sarah was a Blackwood. The woman he had left penniless in a motel was the sister of the man buying his company. Yes. Richard stammered, his survival instinct kicking in. He was a salesman above all else. He just had to get through the demo. He had to get the signature. Once the money transferred, he could disappear. He could buy an island. He could escape her. Good, Sarah said. I'm looking forward to seeing your code in action, Richard. I hear it's revolutionary. 10 minutes later, Richard stood on the raised stage in front of the Temple of Dendur. A massive 8K LED screen loomed behind him. The lights dimmed, casting the audience into darkness. He gripped the podium. His hands were shaking so badly, he had to lock his elbows to steady them. He looked out into the void. In the front row, bathed in the glow of the stage lights, sat Alexander and Sarah. She was watching him with the predatory focus of a hawk circling a field mouse. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard began, his voice wavering before he cleared his throat and found his rhythm. Welcome. Tonight, Sterling Dynamics introduces the future. He clicked a remote. The screen flared to life with the sleek metallic logo of Project Aegis. In a world of cyber threats where our data is more valuable than gold, we need a shield. I built Aegis to be that shield. An adaptive polymorphic algorithm that learns from attacks in real time. He was gaining confidence now. The lie was comforting. It was a script he knew by heart. But words are cheap, Richard said, flashing a charming smile that looked ghastly under the harsh lights. Let's see it in action. I am going to initiate a live Level 5 DDoS and malware attack on our local server, and Aegis will neutralize it instantly. He tapped the tablet on the podium. On the big screen, a visualization of the server architecture appeared. Red lines representing the virus began to swarm the blue core. Watch, Richard commanded. The system detects the anomaly. The blue core pulsed. The red lines were pushed back. The crowd murmured in appreciation. It was working. Richard let out a breath, he didn't know he was holding. It was working. He was going to get away with it. In the front row, Sarah opened her small velvet clutch. She didn't take out a phone. She took out a specialized Flipper Zero device, modified with a high-gain antenna. She looked at Richard. Their eyes locked. She mouthed one word. Goodbye. She pressed the center button. On the giant screen, the blue core didn't just stop fighting. It turned a sickly, violent purple. The smooth hum of the audio system was replaced by a jarring, high-pitched screech that caused audience members to cover their ears. What is that? Richard tapped the tablet frantically. Just a minor audio glitch, folks. 1 second. But it wasn't a glitch. The code on the screen began to unravel. The beautiful interface dissolved, revealing the raw command lines underneath. And then the text started to appear. It wasn't typing. It was being stamped onto the screen in massive block letters. Critical system failure. Unauthorized override. License key revoked. Stop it! Richard yelled at the tech crew in the back. Cut the feed. Cut the video. But the tech crew was helpless. Sarah had bypassed the presentation layer and was communicating directly with the kernel of the software she had built. The text on the screen cleared and a new message appeared, scrolling slowly so everyone could read it. Source code author. Verification. Scanning. Biometric syntax. Author identified. Sarah Blackwood. Knee cross. Current user. Richard Sterling. Access denied. Error. Intellectual property. Theft detected. The room went dead silent. The silence was louder than the screeching had been. 500 of the most powerful people in New York stared at the screen, then at Richard. Richard stood frozen. He looked like a man who had been stripped naked in Times Square. No, he whispered into the hot mic. That's... Someone hacked it. She hacked it. He pointed a trembling finger at Sarah. She's sabotaging me. Arrest her. Sarah stood up. She didn't need a microphone. She projected her voice with the training of a CEO. I didn't hack it, Richard, she said, her voice cutting through the room. I activated the dead man's switch. I wrote it into the subroutine of the encryption layer 3 years ago. Line 40,000. Do you know what line 40,000 says? Richard stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He didn't know. He had never read the code. He couldn't even read C++. It says, Sarah continued walking toward the stage stairs, that if the administrative ownership of this software is transferred without the biometric authorization of the creator, me, the code, self-destructs. On the screen, the lines of code began to delete themselves, rapidly, gigabytes of data vanishing in seconds. You're destroying the product, Richard screamed, rushing to the edge of the stage. That's worth $5 billion. Stop it. It's worth nothing, Sarah yelled back, her composure finally breaking into righteous fury. Because it's mine. You didn't build this, Richard. You brought me coffee while I built it. You went to parties while I debugged it. You slept with your PR director while I optimized the kernel. The crowd gasped. Phones were out. Live streams were running. Hashtag Sterling Fraud was already trending on Twitter. Alexander Blackwood slowly stood up. He walked to the stairs and handed Sarah a document folder he had been holding. Sarah took it and tossed it onto the stage. The papers scattered at Richard's feet. What is this? Richard wheezed. That, Alexander said, his voice booming, is a copy of the indemnity and fraud agreement you signed last week. Clause 7A. Richard looked down at the papers. It states, Alexander recited from memory, that if the seller misrepresents the ownership of the intellectual property, the seller agrees to pay a penalty fee equal to the proposed valuation of the sale to cover damages, wasted time, and corporate espionage investigation costs. Richard fell to his knees. He physically collapsed, the strength leaving his legs. $5 billion, Richard whispered. I don't have $5 billion. We know, Sarah said, standing over him from the floor, looking up like a vengeful deity, which is why we have already executed a lien on your assets, all of them. My stock. Gone, Sarah said. The house in the Hamptons. Ours, she replied. The yacht. Repossessed an hour ago in Monaco, Alexander added pleasantly. Richard looked around the room. The investors were turning away in disgust. The reporters were typing furiously. He looked for Jessica. He saw the back of her silver dress as she sprinted toward the exit, pushing past a waiter, disappearing into the night. She hadn't even looked back. You can't do this, Richard sobbed, tears streaming down his face, ruining his spray tan. I'm Richard Sterling. I'm a visionary. Sarah walked up the stairs. She stood over him. The camera flashes were blinding, capturing the image that would be on the cover of every newspaper tomorrow, the Queen in red, standing over the crying king in the dust. She leaned down, bringing her lips close to his ear. You're not a visionary, Richard, she whispered. You're a user, and your free trial just expired. She straightened up and looked at the security team, standing in the wings. Blackwood's private security. She nodded once. 2 massive guards moved onto the stage. They grabbed Richard by his arms, hauling him up. His legs dragged uselessly. Get off me! Richard shrieked, his voice cracking. I want my lawyer. Call Davies. Call Pearson and Spector. Mr. Davies is on the phone with us right now, Alexander called out from the floor, holding up his cell phone. He says he is terminating your representation, effective immediately. Something about a bounced retainer check. The guards dragged Richard Sterling off the stage. His tuxedo was rumpled, his tie crooked, his dignity incinerated. His screams echoed through the Temple of Dendur until the heavy doors slammed shut behind him. The room was silent for a long beat. Then Sarah turned to the audience. She didn't apologize. She didn't shrink. She walked to the podium, tapped the tablet, and reset the screen to the Blackwood Holdings logo. I apologize for the theatricality, she said, her voice steady and commanding. But at Blackwood Holdings, we believe in transparency. The Aegis software will be relaunched next month under its rightful ownership. We look forward to doing business with those of you who value integrity over image. She looked at Alexander. He tipped an imaginary hat to her. For the first time in 10 years, Sarah didn't feel like a shadow. She felt like the sun. And as the applause started slowly at first, then building into a thunderous roar, she knew she hadn't just taken back her company. She had taken back her soul. The collapse of Richard Sterling was not a slow decline. It was a free fall. In the 48 hours following the gala at the Met, the legal machinery of Blackwood Holdings moved with the precision of a guillotine. The indemnity and fraud clause Alexander had referenced was ironclad. Because Richard had signed the preliminary agreement claiming ownership of intellectual property, he did not legally hold. He had committed corporate fraud on a massive scale. The headlines were merciless. The New York Times, sterling silver turned to rust, the $5 billion lie. Forbes, from unicorn to carcass. How Richard Sterling lost it all in one night. Richard sat in the office of his lawyer, Mr. Davies at Pearson and Spectre. But the atmosphere had changed. There was no premium scotch poured. There were no reassuring smiles. "We have to drop you, Richard," Davies said, not even looking up from his file. "Drop me," Richard sputtered. He looked haggard. He hadn't slept or changed his clothes since the gala. "I pay you a retainer of 50,000 a month." "You can't drop me. Your assets are frozen," Davies replied coldly. "The retainer check bounced this morning. Blackwood obtained an emergency injunction at 9:00 a.m. They have a lien on everything. The Hamptons house, the Tribeca loft, the accounts in the Cayman Islands, even your car." "My car?" "The repo men are towing the Aston Martin from the garage as we speak. You're insolvent, Richard, and frankly representing you is a liability to the firm's reputation. Please leave." Richard walked out onto 6th Avenue. It was raining again, a cruel echo of the day he had fired Sarah. He reached into his pocket for his phone to call an Uber, but the screen was black. Service suspended for non-payment. He stood on the curb, the water soaking through his tuxedo jacket, realizing with a dawn of horror that he didn't even have the cash for a subway ticket. 2 weeks later, the physical dismantling of his life began. The auction of his personal effects was held to satisfy a portion of the debt owed to Obsidian Ventures. It was a humiliation ritual. Sarah didn't attend, but she watched the live stream from her new office. Richard's old office, now stripped of his pretentious modern art and redecorated in warm, commanding tones of mahogany and gold. She watched as the auctioneer held up Richard's watch collection. "Lot 45, a platinum Rolex Daytona. Do I hear 20,000? She watched as his custom golf clubs, his wine collection, and even the furniture she had once picked out for their home were sold off to strangers. Then the camera panned to the back of the auction room. There was a commotion. A woman was being escorted out by security. It was Jessica. She looked nothing like the gleaming creature on the yacht in Monaco. Her roots were showing her makeup was smeared, and she was screaming at the auctioneer. "That's my necklace. He gave that to me. You can't sell it." "It was purchased with embezzled company funds, ma'am," the security guard said blandly, guiding her toward the exit. "It belongs to the creditors now." Sarah turned off the screen. She felt a strange sensation. She expected joy. She expected to feel a rush of dopamine. Instead, she just felt clean. It was like scrubbing a stain out of a rug. It wasn't happy work, but it was necessary. Alexander walked in. He was carrying 2 coffees from a small cart on the corner, the kind Sarah used to love, before Richard forbade her from drinking cheap swill. "Thought you might need this," Alexander said, placing the paper cup on her desk. "Did you see?" Sarah asked. "I did." Alexander nodded. "Jessica attempted to sell her story to TMZ yesterday. The monster I dated. She tried to paint herself as a victim of his manipulation. Did they run it? No." Alexander took a sip of his coffee. "I bought the rights to her story for a very modest sum, and then killed it. She gets enough money to buy a bus ticket back to wherever she came from, but she signs an NDA. She disappears. She doesn't get to be famous for destroying you." Sarah smiled, a genuine warm smile. "You think of everything." "I protect my family," he said simply. "Now there is one last piece of business. The transfer of the company title. The board is waiting." The final confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in the lobby of the Sterling Dynamics building, now renamed Cross Blackwood Technologies. Sarah was leaving for the day, flanked by 2 security guards. She was wearing a trench coat over a sharp business suit, looking every inch the CEO. As she headed toward the waiting Rolls-Royce, a figure stepped out from behind a pillar. It was Richard. He looked unrecognizable. He had lost 20 pounds. His face was unshaven, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He was wearing a cheap tracksuit and worn-out sneakers. "Sarah," he rasped, rushing forward. The security guards moved instantly, blocking him, hands on their holsters. "Back away, sir." Sarah held up a hand. "It's okay. Let him speak." The guards stepped back slightly but remained tense. Richard looked at her, his eyes darting between her face and the expensive car waiting for her. The disparity between them was a chasm 10 miles wide. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking, I need help. I have nowhere to go. My friends won't take my calls. I'm sleeping in a shelter on 42nd Street. They stole my shoes last night." Sarah looked at his feet. He was wearing mismatched sneakers. "I'm sorry to hear that, Richard," she said evenly. "You can't do this to me," he pleaded, tears welling up in his eyes. "We were married for 10 years. I made a mistake. Okay, I made a terrible mistake. But I built this place. I have ideas I can consult for you. Please, just give me a job. Anything. Even entry level." He fell to his knees on the marble floor of the lobby he once owned. "Please, Sarah. I'm begging you. I have nothing." Sarah looked down at him. She remembered the nights she sat up coding while he slept. She remembered him calling her dead weight. She remembered the look on his face when he evicted her. She crouched down, not to comfort him, but to look him in the eye. "Do you remember what you said to me, Richard, when you handed me the divorce papers?" Richard sobbed, shaking his head. "You said I belonged in the shadows. You said I was a liability." She stood up, smoothing her coat. "I didn't take your money because I'm greedy, Richard. I didn't take your company because I'm cruel. I took them because they were never yours. You were a squatter in the house of my intellect." She signaled to the driver. The car door opened. "I won't give you a job," Sarah said, "because you aren't qualified to work at my company. But—" She reached into her purse and pulled out a single bill. She dropped it on the floor in front of him. It was a $20 bill. "There's a TGI Fridays a few blocks over," she said, echoing his words from years ago. "I hear they're hiring waiters. You used to be good at that. Maybe you can start over. Properly this time." She got into the car. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing out the noise of his weeping. As the car pulled away, merging into the New York traffic, Sarah didn't look back. 6 months later, the boardroom of Cross Blackwood Technologies was buzzing. The quarterly earnings report was out, and the stock had tripled. The release of the Aegis 2.0 software, properly credited to Sarah, had revolutionized cybersecurity for banks and hospitals worldwide. Sarah sat at the head of the table. She wasn't just the sister of a billionaire anymore. She was a titan in her own right. Alexander sat to her right, beaming with pride. "The acquisition of the Silicon Valley chip manufacturer is complete," Sarah announced to the board. "We are expanding operations to Tokyo and London next quarter." The board members applauded. These were serious people, veterans of Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan, and they looked at Sarah with genuine respect. After the meeting, Sarah and Alexander stood on the balcony of the penthouse office, looking out over the city. The sun was setting, painting the skyscrapers in hues of orange and purple. "You know," Alexander said, leaning against the railing. "I checked on him. Richard." Sarah looked at her brother. "And he's working at a car wash in Queens. He lives in a small studio apartment. He pays his taxes. He's ordinary." Sarah nodded. "Good. Ordinary is what he always was. He just wore a very expensive mask. She turned to Alexander. I never thanked you properly, Alex. Not for the money, but for believing me when I was standing in the rain with nothing. Alexander wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You are my blood, Sarah. But you saved yourself. I just gave you the hammer. You were the one who swung it. Sarah looked at the horizon. She thought about the journey from the scared orphan to the invisible wife, to the discarded woman, to the CEO. She touched the ruby necklace at her throat, the blackwood heart. I'm not afraid of the rain anymore, she whispered. No. Alexander smiled. You're the storm. They stood together, two titans above the world, watching the lights of the city flicker on one by one, like stars in a galaxy they now owned. The past was a lesson. The present was a victory. And the future belonged to the woman who refused to stay in the shadows. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about the reclamation of self-worth. Richard Sterling represents the people in our lives who mistake our kindness for weakness and our silence for stupidity. He thought he could extract Sarah's value and discard the person, forgetting that the source of the magic was never the company. It was her. Sarah's journey proves that rock bottom is not the end. It is the solid foundation upon which you build a new empire. She didn't just get her brother's help. She used her own genius, the very thing Richard stole, to seal his fate. It serves as a powerful reminder. You can steal a person's ideas, you can steal their money, but you can never steal their fire. When the underdog bites back, they don't just leave a mark, they rearrange the food chain. Did you enjoy this story of karmic justice? If you felt that satisfaction when Richard was exposed on stage, please hit the like button. It helps more people find this story. What would you have done if you were Sarah? Would you have given Richard a job, or did he deserve the car wash? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell. We release new stories of drama, romance, and justice every week. You don't want to miss the next one. Thanks for watching.